Guys, all I'm saying is this, okay? We had a YouTuber in the election, but we also had an intergalactic genius in Count Binface. Things are okay. Things are A-okay. Crossings for everyone. And that's that.
Croissant.
Yeah, I think Count Binface. I've subscribed to his YouTube channel. Very, very interesting character. Lots of like a weird background. If you're listening to this now, just look up the whole background of Count Binface and where it all came from. Very, very like there's a whole legal side of it, there's a drama side of it, but all in all, it's a guy in a costume who's running for every single parliamentary thing possible. Elections, mayoral elections, anything. And it's just a cool gimmick. It's just a pretty cool gimmick. That's it. Welcome to Sealy Wales Presents. I was probably put the title of this. I was here as well, right? I was like, what's the title of this? We're going to call it the British Election Special. So, Sealy Wales Presents British Election Special. The BES. The best.
The best.
We are discussing the election that has just taken place. We're recording this the 6th. It'll probably come out on the 8th or even the 7th if you guys are lucky. As of now, there's currently one seat that hasn't been declared yet, which is hilarious.
It's really funny.
I think that it's like somewhere up north or in like Ireland or Scotland or so on. It's
the Highlands of Scotland, yeah.
Incredible. Yep, no carrier pigeons have been available yet or whatever. For some reason, everyone thought there was Hackney. Everyone's like, oh, it's Hackney. Hackney's always late. Hackney was one of the first to be announced because Dan Abbott's going to win. Meg Haley's going to win. Like, there's no ifs, buts, or maybes. And then Jeremy Corbyn was pretty slam dunk. But yeah, we want to talk about mental health in and around the world of politics. There's loads of very broad topics you can have, but we've dialed it in quite well, I think. I hope. It's myself and Joe and I.
The bullet points are the gods for us. Like, so they will help us.
We wanted to discuss. I might actually put the articles that you referenced in the description. If I forget, by all means, please feel free to comment that I've forgotten. But we've used a few articles as reference points as well as our own personal experiences. But also, I have to very, very quickly highlight this. This podcast is a mental health podcast. We do discuss things that may be triggering, for example, the election, as well as other various topics such as poor mental health, declining mental health, bad thoughts and stuff.
Family trauma potentially as well.
There we go. Yeah, exactly that. Thank you, Joe. This podcast is for everyone, but it might not be for you. We are not going to hunt you down. We are not going to declare your vote void. I made it reference to the
very good.
But yeah, voting stress. I personally, I thought I wasn't a person who gets like stressed out by the idea of voting. This year, however, was slightly different due to the fact that you kind of knew what the result was going to be going into it. However, the time leading up to it, there was a lot of stress about how it was going to unfold. We didn't know there was going to be an election for a little while. We didn't know when it was going to be, as well as constant news. As you know, the article we read, and also as Joe put it, the 24-hour news cycle is very, very, very fervent. It's active. It's there. It's the world is there, and it never stops. If you have a phone in your hand, it will never ever stop. You can watch a live feed of Sky News for free on YouTube now, as well as any other BBC News as well. You're never without the news in a way, as opposed to maybe 10, 15 years ago where it was very much a segmented thing. News are coming out at a certain time and you might get the odd article online, but now it's everywhere. You can watch it and stream it for free. I have been exposed to a lot of various different levels of, be it propaganda, be it manifestos, be it advertising, and be it just in general, political, I guess, it's a bit of a nuisance, really. I personally didn't see many people campaigning for votes on the news, but I saw loads of talking points surrounding why we should vote. So we see a lot of ministers of parliament, be it Conservative, be it Labour, be it Reform, discussing immigration at length and discussing what they would do in comparison to the other parties who, have a track record or not have a track record. For example, Labour discussing immigration and saying what they would do differently to the Conservatives. For me, that's a really sore topic. Worked in Cali, saw what happens firsthand. I'm just a bit like, their aren't very enticing. However, I then saw Reform, and I was like, holy Jesus Christ, these guys might get some seats. And that was a stressful reality as well. The idea that this is a party who, in my opinion, and I know I'm trying to keep it as apolitical as possible, but I view it like this. Not every Reform voter is a racist, but every racist is probably a Reform voter. And it is scary watching them build and watching guys like Nigel Farage win a seat. Because I know what he thinks of people who are my skin color, people who are like me, people who are traveling and trying to find somewhere safe to be, And that causes stress. I'm constantly seeing his face, constantly seeing the things he said, seeing statements made by people of his party, and there being seemingly no punishment behind it. And it's just like, well, it never really ends.
And unfortunately, he is an MP now.
Yeah, 8 times he's tried. 8. But yeah, when it comes to voting stress, Joe, what is the things that you think of? And have you been affected by it?
So, okay, so voting stress for me, it's a very interesting one in the sense that I think I have an avoidant personality generally. So I think when this does happen, I tend to kind of avoid the politics itself. To talk more about like the specifics of me, though, like I don't have social media in the way that you do, for example, and I know a lot of people do. So my levels of kind of opt-in to political like stuff in general, I feel like I tend to have a lot more control. It's not to say that it's good though in certain ways, which is that whole aspect of the avoidant personality, right? I will do a lot of things to just remove myself completely, and sometimes I will go through a phase, even when it's incredibly important and very close to an election, for example, becoming a little bit apolitical, just like not really like listening to anything, not reading anything, not looking it up enough on my local MPs, for example, which I know there's different levels to how people actually engage in politics in terms of like the like local and then above, but it's, as a general rule, there is a lot of, for me, a lot of the activity of not getting involved as opposed to being overwhelmed by what I'm seeing. There's a certain level of that is helpful, but it has meant that for many years of my life, I have not been very political as a result. Like despite growing up the way I have, despite the amount of influence I've had, I have taken moments of my life where I have kind of opted out of politics for periods of time. That's not a good thing. And part of the sense of voting stress that I think I really want to get, I want to make clear, super clear, voting stress is a very reasonable thing, right? It's not one of those kinds of things where it's like, oh, you're just thinking about something that you can't control and is not that important. It's like, no, this is incredibly important. It's like, do you get stressed because you're in an area where sharks might be in open ocean water? Yeah, okay. Like there is a kind of like reasonable stress if you know that there are sharks right next to you, right? Very different from if you're just going into the ocean whatsoever, like without any reasoning. So there is an element of this that is truly and utterly reasonable. Just want to make that clear. However, the voting stress has a very mean streak on preventing people from actually engaging in politics, which I think has huge significance for people going beyond that and actually doing something that gives them power or gives them their rights and things like that. So for me personally, I have had lots of moments where I become quite an apolitical person, and I have to catch up on everything, which is also not a good thing, because then that becomes a very overwhelming period of time, and I may or may not like get back into it properly as a result. And so for the avoidant personality side, I'm your guy, I understand you. And if you're not necessarily like that and you're braving it, but it's killing you at the same time, that's, I think, more what you're like, if I'm correct, like the experience that you have with the news cycle and the experience of.
I'm a bit of both. It's like the whole extrovert introvert idea of it. Like I'm very much in the middle of it. So, for example, I've really enjoyed seeing Sir Ed Davey and his campaigning, because he just does a whole lot of chaotic bullshit. Like, hey, what you doing, Ed? I'm gonna bungee jump off of a building. Why? I don't know. Like, I'm gonna go dive into some water. What is this even to do with the election? I don't even know. Just does it anyway. Like, his policies are fairly sound as well. So it's just like a somewhat lovable guy just doing really endearing, but overwhelmingly like nonsensical shit. Like, why? So that's been fun to see. But then on the flip side of it as well, I can engage with that, but I know that what's going to happen is if I engage with it for long enough, the channel, well, the news cycle will switch to something else. You know, here's what Rishi Sunak had to say on this like deep issue, and you don't want to not see it because you don't want to be like ill-informed, but then you also don't want to see it because you know what's going to happen. You know how you're going to feel. So I get to dip in and dip out like you do, because again, my only social media is by like YouTube, would be Reddit, very rarely Instagram. I haven't seen anything political on Instagram at all. I don't really use it often.
Oh, okay. I was about to say that surprises me otherwise, because there is a lot of political stuff on that. Yeah.
And Reddit. So it's like the political stuff I see on Reddit actually is more American-based things with drips of like English stuff. But I stay away from the United Kingdom subreddit because it's full of racists. So I just know not to ever go there. So I choose. I opt in with that. Like one of the statistics we got from this, and this talks about our emotions when it comes to voting stress, is 44% of people find it hard to switch off and avoid political news, but then also 44% of Brits feel despair, and a third feel anger, which is 35%, and disgust, 32%, when thinking about politics today. And we were discussing before we started like recording how those feelings are very like similar but also different, and they all have their own like different section. But I think you mentioned that it comes from a feeling of hopelessness as well at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think despair like kind of accurately is the synonym for something like hopelessness. The feeling of anger and disgust is interesting. And I don't mean that in the sense that it's like unusual, because it actually makes a lot of sense to me. A lot of people, and we've discussed this in past episodes, where the people that we've spoken to who have kind of noped out of politics in general, which is quite a weirdly kind of like passively aggressive thing towards your own feelings of like, or it passively aggressively like affects the way you feel about politics in the way that I should say, actually, it just passively does so, but it affects the way that you also feel about it, because there's the anger and disgust comes from the perception that people have of politics, right? And so whether it be like votes not counting, or whether like feeling like they don't count, or whether it's to do with the fact that politics is in general really fucking infuriating, especially in the aftermath of an actual election, when stuff doesn't happen that they feel like should, or when the world just seems to get worse and worse and worse after moments of after like speeches or statements of hope and things like that. This kind of letdown, this like very clear kind of pervasive cultural letdown, That isn't to say, by the way, that nothing ever after election is ever like that there aren't like positives. There are. You can go through it all. We love to talk about the negative stuff, and I to be clear, this is actually very much like a news cycle and social media thing that we don't see a lot of the positive aspects that do happen in politics, but also at the same time, we're now getting to the point where, and again, not to be too political specifically, but we've had a certain party in the UK for a while now, and the number of bills that have come out which have infuriated me, and yet somehow felt like they went under the radar to a certain extent of like the general discussion amongst people, like of around me and things like that, outside of my own family and so on and friends, makes me realize how easily this kind of apathy and this desire not to engage because it's so oppressively like upsetting then ends up becoming this this vicious cycle where now more worse shit can happen and no one feels like they ever had control in the first place, and yet they were essentially like nudged in that direction. The anger and disgust is, at least, and this is now coming from my perspective, I feel like is something that comes alongside despair very regularly amongst people. Nothing even to do with politics specifically. Just people's relationship with hopelessness is to act in a certain, can be to either like kind of fall more into that despair, or it tends to, to react in a way which is aggressive, right? Which is, and it doesn't have to, anger and disgust are distinct different things, but anger in the kind of general, like absolute, and again, we're talking about like a sort of emotional experience. We're not necessarily talking about like a person who doesn't like the political system currently. Like that's a kind of different sentiment, I feel, when you're just like, I think things should be different, versus a kind of just straight up like, I fucking hate politics and even talking about it. I don't want to hear about it, right? And disgust being a very similar thing, where it's like, where it's very much avoidant of that sense of, I do not want to be near it. I want politics to be repelled. I don't want politics in my stories. Like that like comment that people make where it's like, oh, I don't like it because it has politics in it, like in a story which doesn't like directly, and it might not even, this could be like the most minor political reference or something like that, or it could be like a more larger subject where it just kind of like talks about like trans people or something like that, and people are like, oh, I felt like it was too political. Some of those are like a bit over, are very unsubtle, not very well done, but there are lots where it's just simply people do not want to hear topics, right? And that, which is a hilarious statement, right? It's not even like the idea of like talk about like saying, oh, I'm against politics, or I don't want politics in anything that I see, is like saying you don't want topics of anything to be in what you're like, things that we actually should be discussing, you do not want to have in your media, right? And that's where I think like disgust is a particular like relationship or word to use to describe that feeling of, I do not want this at all, right? And the meaningful data we can take away from this is that, one, it's a large number of people, definitely larger, I believe, than what we would consider to be people like dealing with mental health issues like regularly, right? We're talking about 44% is a very large statistic. And of course, we don't quite know. I don't like directly know how this was obtained, but I'm very sure to a certain extent that a lot of the people who don't feel some of these emotions could indeed feel some of these emotions, or are very much like kind of not interacting with politics in a certain way where they can be affected by this, in the way that I was describing, where I kind of opt out and then don't interact, and so I don't really feel anything. But as soon as I start edging back in, I start feeling like despair, for example, right? It's the this is a larger issue of politics, like at its core, like the problem with a lot of political stuff. And in particular, I think we might go into this a little bit more later on, but things like how how campaigning tends to be, like I love this is a quote that you like pointed out that you really liked, like the pervasive negativity of the campaigns create a level of stress and resentment that intruded into many people's intimate relationships, like the level of the vitriol and pervasive negativity, right? Like the fact that
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not a discussion, right? It's not a discussion like me and you can have about something where we can disagree on something, but we can come to a recognition about it. It's
Yeah,
very
exactly.
it is a fight, and it is a very much a, like, these people are the worst, these people, and then you got the other side being like, these people are the worst, and in every way that you can possibly imagine, they are making arguments that, like, they're not always making bad arguments, but they will sometimes make bad arguments just for the sake of making the other one look bad. And then on the other flip side of that, they will basically like straw man one another to just to also kind of create this sense of like, these people are not on your side, right? Which is a very isolating and alienating experience.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I think that we talk about the 44% with the emotions, but there's also 44% who find it hard to switch off. So that means there's 56% of people who we could have a gander, have a bit of a guess, and say that they aren't really engaging with it all. However, I view it more like, do you know those people who say, to be honest, the person, it's been said for ages, but the person who's really brought it back to the forefront, credit to him, is Mr. George Galloway, who lost his seat in Rochdale, well, by the way, after only 8 months or 6 months, whatever, 4 months, 4 months. He says, you know, they're both two sides of the same backside or whatever he said. The idea that, oh, both sides are bad, so we need an alternative, or there's no point in, for me, that builds that divisive mentality of there's no point in trusting anyone because they're all bad. So there's no point in voting, or there's no point in committing to anything, no point in investigating, because it's all the same. Like, all politicians are the same. And there's differing opinions on that, but there's that idea that the way I'm going to engage with politics, I'm not going to engage in politics. And that goes directly into our next point, and you've actually segued into it quite well, Joe. Like, the idea of being a voice and getting people to vote and campaigning for parties and things like that. Like, I mentioned that at work, there was a group of people who'd said, oh, we're not voting, our vote means nothing. And that actually hurt me. I was like, I remember when I first got the chance to vote, it was a really exciting moment, you know. I was like, this is a moment for me. And these guys have been like, oh, we haven't voted for the last like 2 or 3 elections now. We're proud of it. And they're like, no, they're all the same. But then they're the same people who complain about policies that were done because they didn't vote. Like, election turnout is ridiculously low every single year. For some reason, Alexa decided to talk. Stop. You fucking who? Like no one even like said anything. No one even said it. Like who hurt you? You know. Anyway, but yeah, like it's just a journal. I'm keeping that all in, by the way. like I there's the idea though, that the idea of, oh, we don't need to do something, and I was finding it difficult to not be a voice and be like, hey, come on, we have to vote. Come on, we have to do something about what's happening, like to schools, what's happening with mental health, and what actually got me to finally disconnect, and this is luckily very early on in the cycle as well, was understanding 2 things. One, when it comes to people who are of a certain age, they will probably never change their minds. And just like you said earlier, it's not really a discussion like what me and you are having. It's a fight. It's a battle. It's a poor man's argument. It's a straw man this. It's a vitriolic ad hoc attack here. It's a name call here. It's a racial slur here. It's a comment here. Like, no one can actually sit down and discuss in a way that will make, like, if me and you were on opposing sides, we're discussing politics, I don't think either of us will leave being like, oh, I'm now going to vote this way. I think we'll just leave upset at each other. And that is the sad reality of it here. So when it comes to campaigning for parties, it feels like you're just campaigning for votes you're probably already going to get. And being the voice of, hey, we need people to vote, that in a way can also feel fairly like hopelessness as well. And why are we here? Why are we doing all this stuff? And it's like that all links back into the idea of voting stress as well.
Mm-hmm.
And how that is like the main thing here. How it can bog us down a lot and disconnecting so much. And
Yeah,
how
so
do we disconnect safely?
Yeah, the difference between like the kind of the voting stress of listening to the news and stuff like that and forming your own opinions about what you want to do, and the social context in which you're now engaging with other people on the subject, right? Because this is not we're not all like just, I mean, you know, there is the whole idea that we're just all on our phones now, but it doesn't change the fact that we have to talk to one another, and no doubt something that we've looked over or whatever is going to inform something we say with another person, right? And obviously certain people are very much like no religion, no politics, and they're very much like push that out the way. But the fact that that phrase even exists means that we know that it's a thing that will happen. People will discuss how they feel, right? I've you know, in the house I live in, I've had many conversations with people here about things. Luckily, we don't tend to like have too many issues on the things that I think are fundamentally quite important. But you know, like you know, I'm not in a house of racists, for example. But like but there will be things that are like, you know, that will come up, and I have learned somewhat how to engage with people. But one, not every conversation I have with people goes in a positive direction. If not even because I'm just not able to say the right thing, right? It is not going to it's not going to do the thing that I need to happen, which is not to like get them on my side. I'm not like like to a certain extent that's not the point. It's more about trying to break down the barrier of I'm like I'm like an alien being coming to Earth to, you know, to get you to vote for an alien leader, a leader who's an alien in disguise, who, you know, when he comes into power, or she, but I'm going to say he for the sake of it, because we have you know, we have a two-party system in the UK. Like, you know, and I'm just, all I can think about is Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak right now. But like the you know, our own flair of two-party system of the US as well. Like that's not what's going on. I'm not like I'm not staging like, you know, that kind of conspiracy theorist level of bullshit. But that's how a lot of these conversations can feel sometimes, where it's like, I'm not trying to do that. I'm not trying to make you, I'm not trying to, what's the right way of saying this? I'm not trying to deceive you. I'm trying to tell you how I feel, right? That's what's happening here. I'm not trying to do something that is in an attempt to like, you know, like tempt you kind of devil style, right? Like, and then suddenly at the end, I'm like, wow, all in all, I tempted you into the dark pit. Like, no. What's happening is that I want to talk to someone about something that I think is important, and probably they think is important as well. Just they might be on a different side to me or whatever. But the point isn't so much about I need you to get on my camp or otherwise you're out. It's about I want you to feel comfortable having a conversation about this with someone who doesn't agree with you. And I want you to look at me and not look at me as an enemy. I want you to look at me as someone who is your work colleague, or someone you live with, or a normal human being, like, you know, like that kind of experience. And so like I've had loads of conversations with people throughout life where that has happened, where someone has looked at me and thought, oh, you're not like most X, like whatever X is, you know.
Yeah.
I won't go into all of my like fucking checkboxes, but you get the point, right? And it's like the fact that they're saying that is not really, in my opinion, to do with them having that experience person to person with most people. Because I think most people, on average, when they're actually engaging with one another in the streets, I'll say on average, by the way, because I recognize that's not always true, are not going to be as vitriolic and, you know, I love just seeing the word vitriolic in the quote is making me use it so much more. Vitriolic and like and and divisive around these issues, right? And so the relationship of person to person is a very difficult one, and yet is something that is ultimately going to happen unless you are just willing, unless you're kind of doing the disgust or just pure like I don't want to talk about it thing. However, there are moments where this is important, and this is where we get a little bit onto families. I think that we should cover this a little bit.
Yeah,
Like people who are close to you and important to you, because
yeah,
this
of
is
course.
there's loads of examples of this, whether it's like, for example, religion and things like that, very similar conversations. But I want to talk about that just because, and I don't actually have as much to say because personally, my family, I largely don't have issues with politically on most things. We've had conversations in the past, but like it's not generally a problem. And I also know that they're quite nuanced about this sort of thing. And when we have conversations, they're not trying to destroy me, like, or anything like that,
Yeah,
and so on. So,
that's a major thing. Like I'm very similar with in that regard, like family wise, because it's more like I work with a diverse range of people, and I also work in different spaces quite often, and I filter out different spaces and like, things that are creative based as well. So of course the creative based things, for the most part, it's a lot of people who are, we'll consider themselves like left leaning, for example, and then funny enough, in more formal spaces, it's more like center left or center right. And it's like, okay, we just don't really discuss those things because I always find discussing politics, especially where you work, quite difficult. And I it's fairly obvious to guess where people are. But that being said, like, I, I find it somewhat silly to engage in a political discourse with somebody at work, especially because, again, as we discussed, like you getting destroyed, because that's what it kind of descends into, as we discussed earlier. And it's like it's not really worth anything, and there's a lot of resentment that just builds and builds and builds and builds from it, because you view that person not as their character, but as what you perceive them to be.
Mhm.
And it happens quite often. Like I think there's a weird rise of, this is gonna sound really weird, of like white men who are far left, because white men are seen as old white men, I'll paraphrase. Old white men who are far left, because a lot of old white men are seen as being generically racist. Like, oh, like, you see an old white guy, you can assume he's racist. Like guys like Tennessee Brando, I can't remember his first name, but his second name is Ojeda. He was quite often on Young Turks. He's a former army guy as well. You see a lot of these guys who are just like, you look at them and you go, oh, they love Trump. Like this guy's a former military guy or whatever. No. He's as far left as they come. So there's a market for them because they shock you by being so far left and being very progressive in their views. I was like, how sad is that we like look at people, we judge them by their race for like as opposed to like the race is a correlation for who you think they're going to vote for. And it kind of shows our prejudice to it, but also our ingrained fear of something as well. That's where
Mhm.
it could also come from as well. We relate to those things often. And it's like, okay, cool. But it's like, even now, the dust has settled here. And when it comes to things like family and how we discuss things, I've noticed a lot of like, from people who are connected to me loosely, oh, this is like we're gonna have a woke government now, and things like that. And these things don't make any sense either. Like the Labour Party that has won the election, I wouldn't consider to be far left at all. Nor would I consider
No.
them to be quote unquote woke. But for some reason, they're now socialist. You know, Jeremy Corbyn, who probably would be considered a socialist or considered far left, didn't run as a member of the Labour Party. He ran independently, which is what I find even weird about the straw manning and also just the misinformation of the news that we receive, again, going back to 24 news cycle, and how like we have pundits on like football matches discussing political movements. And it's like we have to understand that these people are giving their opinions, not giving factual evidence or anything like that as well, with zero things to back it up with. So the idea of now the dust is settling, we're still waiting for the Highlands of Scotland to send their pigeon over. Where are we at now? Because I wonder if the resentment that we had for, say, the Sunak government and the Conservatives with the people who didn't get the leader that they wanted, are we going to have that reverse now? And things like that. Are we now going to, are we going to become the straw man? You know, are we going to become the defenders of, like, you know, policies that might not go well? Or are we going to be able to understand the nuance of it and understand that some policies just suck? You know?
Yeah, I guess I have a few things to say on different parts. So on the, I'll start with the one you just said. I think that there's something that you have to do for your own personal. It's actually the correct thing to do anyway, but I think it's something that when you kind of realize that this is the correct thing to do anyway, from a kind of like rational, enlightened sense of things, is voting for a party or whatever, like, or even just if you prefer one party over another, right? Don't get bogged. You need to disconnect yourself from the actual party itself, or like this is the problem with politics, where it becomes very, you know, in team sport, right? Like, don't do that. You need to remove yourself. Saying like I would prefer Labour over Conservatives isn't saying a lot, like, honestly, about my position on a lot of things. Like, it really isn't. Like, it says almost nothing, because I personally don't have a particularly I don't particularly enjoy the Labour Party either, right? It's an unfortunate thing, but if you ask me, like you said, the same thing. Like, if I was having to decide, I would choose one, right? But it's really important to disconnect yourself from that. It's also important to disconnect yourself from policies even that you feel strongly about, as far as when you're discussing these things, discuss it and not each other, right? Like, because I think what a lot of people do, but whether someone feels distressed by this or not, even, because there are certain people that just fucking just talk their mouth off and seem to never have an issue, which I'm sure they do, but like, they do it a lot, right? And maybe because they're getting money for it, who knows, depending on the situation. But there are certain people you meet in life, or that you just like engage with online in some way, that just spout, right? And sometimes when this happens, there is this kind of relationship that is the which is the these are me, like what I'm discussing is me, and it's like, no, there is a difference between the person who thinks a certain way and the thing that we're actually talking about, the map and the like the drawing of the map and the actual like landscape, right? They're two different things, but one can give you an idea of the other, right? And so it's kind of important to do that also, because I think it means that in conversations, you need to be able to go, okay, the conversation is not going where I need it to go, or the conversation is going in a bad turn, more so, I think it's the right way of saying it. This is not productive, this is not helpful. If I continue in this, it's now becoming personal to me, because because the way you're talking to me or the way you're acting. I think this is really important when talking about family, actually, because while I very much believe that we should be much more open in discussing things, relationships need to, to work, right? And there are certain cases where you need to have good relationships with the people around you to survive, right? Like, straight up. And without that, life is difficult. So there are times where I would be perfect. Like, let's just say me and my mum completely disagreed with each other on certain things. And let's say that it was bothering me. And let's say that we had conversations, but I found it was unproductive and it was unhelpful. And let's say, for the sake of it, that I was like, okay, I don't want to talk about this anymore. And then just kind of like, she would pop a comment up at me. This is, of course, not what my mum is like. But imagine she like popped a popped a comment like, over days and days, like, talking about this and that, and or like sending me stuff being like, look, I'm right or whatever. And it's like, okay, I want to have a relationship with you. I do not like this will prevent us from having a relationship. And there's a very reasonable need to say no, because this isn't about me and you, what this discussion is, but you're making it about me and you. And it's now bleeding into this me and you thing, and I don't want it to, because that's also not what this is, right? There's I have no problem, by the way, with people kind of identifying themselves as a particular political thing either. I don't want to kind of make it seem like people should be completely robotic in this. I don't think that's actually correct. It's
think with most things to do with politics, it's a nuance, right? There's got to be like a balance and a nuance towards it.
Exactly. Yeah, that nuance.
Like, I'm going to get ridiculed for this in the future. I can feel it. I have a friend and she's very much a conservative. Originally it's because her family got conservative, so she just kept up the tradition. Came from a very middle class background, kind of just, vibes of it, right? Yeah, I've always, like, she didn't really mention it until she mentioned it, and then she got ostracized for a little bit, and it's a bit like, oof, yeah, because she's a Tory. She's a secret Tory. And I made the very good point to everyone that she's not a very secret Tory because she told us she's a Tory. So, like, there's not much of a secret there. And it's like, we can't talk to her until she changes her political views. So people just don't talk to her. I was like, that's a bit stupid. Like, is she hateful? No. Is she a racist? No. Is she even any of the phobics? No. I'm going to strongly, I don't think she listens to the show as well. Great. I don't believe so. She's a bit of a twat, but like, but, I'm saying this purely because I know that she's probably listened to this. Literally, the crux of it is literally like, I don't look at her as a political symbol, nor do I look at her as a representation of politics in any way, shape, or form. And I tend to keep political discussions away from any discussion we have, primarily because what tends to happen is I don't really care, and I'm very apathetic, but people get upset at me for not caring. It's like, how are you friends with her? She ticks this box, and she's voting to you worked in Calais and you're friends with someone who actively wanted to hurt immigrants. How could you do this? Honestly, with ease. The people who are hurting immigrants aren't the people who tick the boxes. It's the people who make the decisions. And sometimes people again, we literally just discussed this. There's a blindness for politics, right? The people I voted for Labour. Guess what? They're probably going to do something that's going to hurt people I care about. That is the sad, sad, sad reality of politics sometimes. And there's a broad nuance towards it. A party will never get anything completely 100% correct. That is sad. That is frustrating. That is annoying. That's where political action can come in if you want it to come in. To then apply it and blame voters for it, no. There's one thing that I will agree on. Politicians tend to be very, very good at masking their intentions and hiding what they want in certain wordings and certain quote unquote policies and in certain, titles of different things. It's easy to have things be lost. So when people say, how can you be friends with a Tory? My answer is easily. Because if they don't show a level of hatred to me, if they are not Kemi, they are not Rishi, they are not Pretty, they are not Suella. No. They are an individual who, she says right now, and I might have to edit all this out, but if she gives the okay on this, she's very conservative, not for her family this time, purely down to financial reasons, because she's in a position now where she earns her own money, she likes to keep her money. Guess what? I can't even blame that. I can't even, as someone who isn't a full capitalist, I can look at it and go, yeah, do you know what? Fine. Makes sense. Haha, you lost anyway. But also, I get it. You have your money. You want to keep your money. You don't want it to be taxed to a high degree. Fine.
The reasoning is there. As long as we're real about what the reasoning is, then we can have a conversation, which I prefer versus the kind of subtle, or not even subtle necessarily, but the obfuscation of reasons and things like that. Like, I much prefer having a good discussion with someone for that reason.
But also, here's the thing:
know.
the people who ostracized her, and still don't speak to her, I find it quite funny because you kick someone out of a friendship circle because they are part of a party that you say is extremely hateful or stuff, and those things are relevant. Those things are very true. But it doesn't mean that she is hateful and she is of that ilk. And better yet, when you push somebody out of your friendship circle because of something like that, you end up pushing them towards the darker parts of said party. I'm being bullied because of my politics. My politics are very mild in comparison to other people of my same political in the same political party I vote within. I guess I'm going to be pushed towards backing the party even more now, because these are where all of my quote-unquote people are. I didn't think my political party was my people. I thought I just voted for it because of what they wrote in a piece of paper. But now it's my social group.
Yeah.
So,
like
that is for me how you get, as I said before, like when it comes to activism and being a voice, we have to be careful that we're not marginalizing people and pushing them in the direction of far rightism or like full on hatred because, hey, these people cost me something. Like, no one's being my friend anymore because I ticked a box because I read a manifesto in a way that I felt like it represented me. And now all of a sudden everyone's saying that I'm a piece of shit and all that stuff. God wants me here. The only people that want me are well, they're in Clacton Sea,
Yeah.
Like, which is why, again, like as we go back to how we relate to politics, I think that social media is a big part of all this. Like when we discuss the indoctrination of, well, we talk about the indoctrination of young boys and things like that, especially. But I want to just delve into transphobia specific here. And you're probably thinking, why? Why transphobia? Because one of the things I've noticed has happened, especially in this political cycle, is we have clips come out. Lots of clips on social media and they get taken in a certain way. And one of the things I've noticed is that when it comes to things like trans issues and trans rights, first things first, fuck you, J.K. Rowling. There, I said it, sue me. Secondly, what happens is we have a lot of people like J.K. who their voices get amplified because of who they are. And they get tarred with a very rightful brush of being transphobic, being a TERF, being a twat. Correct. However, in that, what you tend to see is a lot of people just asking questions. And they ask questions because they don't know the answer. And they don't really get it. They don't get what's going on. Maybe they're just out of it completely. Maybe they're like you, Joe, where they're just kind of checked out of it. So they ask the innocent question of, why is this wrong? And rather than getting an answer, they just get told that they're part of the problem.
Right.
And a lot of the time we miss the chance to educate people because, one, we're fed up with educating people, but two, we are blindsided by the idea of someone just not knowing something. Like, I have whenever I'm engaged in a conversation about any sort of, be it racial issues or whatever, I assume that they're ignorant to the situation rather than assuming that they're arrogant to the situation. And I assume that, and I take that stance because here's the thing. I'm going to guess that a white person doesn't fully understand why I don't really engage with police super well all the time. So I'm more than happy to educate them on the reasons why most of the time. And I assume that they don't know and they're ignorant of the surroundings. If they then go, no, it's not true at all, then they're arrogant to it. Then I can go, do you know what? I'm not going to engage with you. I don't need you. Bye. I can make that choice.
This was for you, not for me. Like, I was working on your behalf, mate, not mine.
I was being the educator here, and I didn't need to, but I care. Yeah. I care about how you take this. And on social media, that window isn't there though. That window isn't there because we care about things like likes and retweets. We care about views. We care about how our image is seen. So we will do things and we will like snap at people, we'll go after people because we feel there's an opportunity to gain something rather than an opportunity to educate. For example, we don't really educate people because one, it rarely ever works, but two, because it doesn't benefit. Like, you, when's the last time you get someone going, do you know what, I was wrong? Because it isn't really there. You're never going to admit that you're wrong, being told that you're an idiot and being told that you're a cunt and being told that you're this and this and this and this.
Mm-hmm.
J.K. Rowling is beyond saving. But a random guy who just went, yeah, but isn't this, or isn't this that? Maybe we can do something about them. You know, maybe we can educate them. Maybe we can point them in a direction. Maybe we can do something. Maybe we can have a more of a positive effect on that. You know, but that's just me.
Yeah, no, I this actually sets me up well because I kind of want to, I want to take 2 points to what you just said. Like the first one is that I truly do believe, and this is sort of in how we relate to politics specifically, and how, and I think more, and more especially like how I think we can attempt to try and deal with things like voting stress, how we can attempt to deal with, because it will happen, it's going to happen, but how we can attempt to engage positively with the experience. And the actual like truth of that is in the name, is engage in some way, right? The what I mean by this is that kind of in the way that a lot, like if you go through like the NHS or lots of other different sites, Mind, otherwise, and so on, Samaritans, blah blah blah. A lot of the a lot of the descriptions of things you can do to improve like your mental health, like for example, whether it be like engaging with other, there's things like like volunteering and blah blah blah, stuff like that. But a lot of it is about engaging with people, talking to people, having some kind of impact outside of yourself, right? Kind of taking the inside, the stress internally, and finding a way to sort of disperse that in a safe way, like amongst other people, right? And in a way that is actually not just purely to get rid of bad, but actually to bring about good. Like, engaging with other people is a good thing. If you have a desire, in this case being you believe that a certain candidate would be best, or you believe at least a certain direction of politics would be best, or there's a particular policy that you think is incredibly important that needs to be put through, it's worth engaging with that. The problem I've always had with the, I kind of described it before with a vicious cycle, but the problem I have with people who kind of know power politics is the issue I've always had with politics in many ways, and the feelings that I've had with politics is that feeling of a lack of control. But there is an element of control that can be gained even if it's purely on a personal level, which is I've done what I can, right? There's an interesting element of I can't necessarily control what this member of parliament's going to say, or what bills are going to go through and things like that. But I can try my best to push anything in a direction. And there is a kind of, this almost this is almost Sisyphus to a certain extent, but I do understand, like, from a mindset, from like a mental perspective, as well as genuinely, I do think this matters. I do think like local community and engagement around politics is actually useful and does make a big deal. The reality is it's just like a sped up version of organic change in culture and political view, right? What you're doing is you're just kind of pushing it a little bit more, as opposed to just letting it go as, at whatever speed it would kind of go. But of course you then have propaganda affecting it all. So it's about like a kind of concentrated like version of that. But even if it didn't do any of that, I truly think that it's a good thing to go, I've tried my best to make a difference. And it might not be anything. It might be so little. I might have made one person just less disgusted of someone who thinks like I do. That might be all it comes down to. But I do think it matters. I do think that there's something useful. I do think that matters, one. But I also think that it actually does make people feel better. As much as, and this is purely from a like selfish mental health perspective almost, which is, you, I think, can feel better by engaging it. again, you have to do it in a certain way. And I do think that that's the difficulty. I think you do have to disconnect somewhat and then be personal in other moments. I think finding like-minded people, as much as we don't want echo chambers, I know that's a whole thing, but as much as like engaging with people who do like who can who and have a conversation and discussion about something, that's a good thing. It's good to talk about the world, I think. Um, Combining that with what you were saying, and I'm almost forgetting this, so please hold a sec. The feeling of the oh god. Oh, there's too many things going on in my head all of a sudden. It was specifically like the animosity, I guess, on it, particularly online, I suppose. But it's the yeah, that's what it is, right? It's the I mentioned before because you were saying like I'm not going to change someone's mind, and I think to an extent I'm again from that perspective where I'm like, but I'm not trying to, and that's why I think sometimes and that's where it relates to this, where it relates to that last point, because I think it is important to have conversations across, right? I mean, you and I both agree on that, but I think what's interesting is that there are moments where you have to be able to say, okay, I've done what I can, right? I've done. I'm not gonna continue to be in this space. It's not worth it. There needs to be, and this comes back from something that I learned many years ago. And I say learned, but someone told it to me, and I was like, oh yeah, that's a thing. And then it took me a long time to actually internalize it. A conversation requires two people. If you're trying your best to engage with someone and they're not engaging back with you, you can't do anything, right? You can't do anything about that. It's not you being bad or not charming enough or not good enough or not smart enough to be able to convince them to engage with you. Just got to be like, okay, they're not going to engage with me. You can then have an opinion about them if you want, like a personal one. I would rather not like then internalize some kind of negativity around that person. But, maybe with enough other people, you can maybe have a little conversation, be like, yeah, that guy's a prick or whatever. But, but the whole point is that engagement, right? And sometimes, and I think there's a decision that people need to have around, hey, engage with politics because it's good for you. And I think it's good in general because I don't want the world to become apathetic. I don't want people to fall further into a sinkhole and actually become more stressed out every time election stuff comes up. If nothing more than just because it feels hopeless, and feeling hopeless is its own level of anxiety and stress. It's not just like the idea that like when you opt out of something that somehow you are completely devoid of any of the negative impacts is not true. There's an element of it which feels true. And I think sometimes if you completely opt out of it, then not only do you have no effect, but you will not be aware of what is going on and what's wrong. Like it'll become impossible for you to figure out and understand how to thou engage with the world in a way that can actually cause you de-stress, like to remove stress from you, to try and understand the world in a way that lets you go, oh, okay, no, I do understand something. And that's what's difficult because it's very easy, it's tempting to do what I've done in the past and run away. But I know that I was stressed out way past the point of not knowing, because every time something came up that I didn't understand or that I wasn't aware of, it caused me so much more emotional stress during those times. So I do think it's important to engage, and I think it's important to engage with other people you do not agree with necessarily, but there does need to be that sense of personal, I need to get the fuck out of here, right? I need to, I've done what I can. This is all good. I need to move on like this, and trying to, and that's what it was. This is the really important part I think you said, which made me think this, and I was trying to look for. It's the way in which someone is ignorant coming into a conversation a lot of the time because the discussions happening are ongoing conversations. They're not, it's not like when someone, for example, with like trans issues, right? If there is a conversation like that happening, it's not like trans issues are like, oh, it's suddenly a recent thing when you see the post. this is a conversation that's been happening for a long time. There's a lot of background. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of political thought about it, social thought about it, etc. And you're like, oh, okay, I don't understand any of this. And suddenly you're having to learn so much information, and you go, okay, why is that bad? And then someone says something to you, and you don't understand what they've said, but you know it's negative, right? Like, you know that they are against you, and you know that you are the devil for having said what you said. And by the way, this goes both ways, obviously. We're using this particular example because that's what you said, but I very much know of like the entire opposite end view, where it's equally as like there's an equal level of ignorance, though maybe in different ways, right, about these issues. And the point is that we need to be better in communicating ourselves and communicating like what has these kind of ideas. There's a lot. It's kind of like the thing of some people find it very difficult to explain something to a kid because they are like, stupid kid, why don't you know the thing I know? And it's like, well, the kid doesn't know that, and you were once that kid who didn't know that, but now you're the now you're the horrible teacher who is like aggressive towards the child because they don't know what you know. Like, it's I can't remember what it's called, but it's to do with like expertise basically, and like you know, and things like that. We need to kind of we need to actually like focus in on that point, because we need to be able to talk about this not as if we're talking to a child, because we shouldn't be treating each other as such. But what I mean, even though you shouldn't talk to a child like I don't think you should talk to children like a child in that way. Is I think we infantilize children far too much. What I mean is that I think there is I think that we need to be able to take people, like you said, at their word and engage with them on it. And I think it's important for ourselves, for them, for everyone, and in general, for how we are going to ever kind of engage with politics going forward. And again, I don't think the news cycle does this. I don't think that social media is a good platform necessarily for it. Like, I don't think it fundamentally is a great space for it. I think you can have multiple people who are very good at it have great conversations on it, but I don't think it lends itself to it, right?
No.
And but it's important that I think we try to remove that we try to talk about things at kind of like fundamental levels that people can understand. And we should start conversations with people that way. We shouldn't start the conversation like, 60% of the way through the journey that has been trans issues in discussion, right? Like, it's because ultimately, I would even say this outright, because this had happened with me, like that, I was a different person when it came to like trans stuff at a certain point in my life. And that was just because I didn't quite understand some of the like thought processes behind it, or ideas about the difference between gender and sex in a more nuanced sense, right? And things like that. Like, I didn't have that concept. So it was hard for me to mentally do the things that these other people were doing, the people that I was talking to or listening to or whatever. And I found it easy to join in with the people who didn't understand it, right? And were being loudmouth about not understanding it, right? Or were not even not understanding it, but just kind of hateful, right? You know? So there's a key element. I think we've gone past specifically like election stuff in this regard, but this all relates to electoral stuff as well, because obviously everyone knows that we need to. Everyone knows the large scale thing. So let's not talk about the large scale thing. Everyone knows that, like, when we're talking about like left wing issues or right wing issues, or when we're talking about like the idea of left and right, no one in the UK in their right mind is thinking anything other than Labour and Conservative, right? That's what everyone is thinking, because that's essentially the system we live in. Now, do I think that the voting system should be different, blah, 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 and all these other sorts of things? Yes, I do think that there should be some change to represent the fact that it's not a great system for that. And the fact that we think that way is because we live in a political system which is developed this way. But the fact is that we do think that way, and it's not for no reason. So when we're discussing whether it's to do with specific stuff around an election or after the fact, in fact, between elections, we're going to have a whole period of time, guess what, where between elections, where, you know, stuff's going to happen. And we're going to be constantly talking about the prime minister, the ministers, the MPs, the decisions each of us made, and the statements they made, and whether and how, you know, in line were they with those statements and all of that. Again, just treat any conversation with someone about these issues with a sense, with a general sense of benefit of the doubt / like you say, treat any sort of lack of understanding they seem to have with ignorance rather than arrogance, rather than malicious intent, but genuine, like they don't get it. And you're going, okay, so how do I explain, like, what are the things they don't understand, and go and in some way find the thing that is not making sense. Because in theory, unless they are just unless you're wrong and they're just better logicians, I don't remember the exact word, but if their logic is in theory better than you and you've just fucked up, if you go, okay, what is it you're not understanding? In theory, you should both come to the same conclusion if the logic holds out, right? Now, I don't believe that the world is as easy as that. I don't think that we can just be like, oh, this means this, therefore this, right? I don't think that is. I don't think that conversations are anywhere near that level of simplicity. But there is a truth statement to the fact that if someone doesn't understand or believe a similar thing to you, there's some element there that they do not agree with you on, and until you find out what that element is, you don't actually have a conversation. Because if we are both starting from the wrong place with one another, in relation to one another, right, then we're going to be arguing about something, but the problem is way in the back of like why we disagree, you know, or why, oh, you don't get this thing, so therefore that's why you don't understand, or I don't get this point of view you have, and that's why I'm saying it in this way, which sounds callous to you, right? And why why the things I'm saying is bringing about an emotional response as opposed to a more kind of like discussion based result. So yeah, a very large engagement of how I feel we should relate to politics in general, and the nature of how that politics should then be our relationship with one another when it's invariably going to happen. I truly am against the sort of culture of don't talk about this stuff. I am. I would love it if, you know, it would be naive of me to say that I think we should just start doing it, because I don't think people will do it very well. So
Yeah.
I'm not in any way saying, oh yeah, no, I'm against it and everyone should do what I do, and which is I go out and I start talking to people on the street about things, you know, regardless of any of like what they're doing or what I might like kind of assume their positions are or whatever. Like no. Like I have these conversations with people that I know, with people, you know, even if it is a work colleague, you know, these are people where something will come up and then we discuss, or it will come on the back of something else, and I'm not scared to go into those discussions. But I am not just going to be like, let's talk about this and put someone on edge. Again, some
Yeah.
people don't want to talk about these things, and I truly understand why.
I
So
would say this. I would say I find like YouTube channels or whatever, social media platforms, that I find this very predatory when they have cameras and they interview people, and I feel like they scope them out, who have like a set, who like they look at them and go, oh, they're gonna have a certain political mindset, and you could tell that these people maybe haven't really thought things through as such, and are speaking more from a place of like, you know, misguided views or misinformation, like fed mindsets. And I find it quite predatory that we video people in those moments, especially the ones who end up saying things like, I think there's a key one where they interviewed someone who was like, hey, these immigrants come and take our jobs and things like that. And it's very clear he hadn't thought things through as much as he probably was thinking about what like sauce he was putting in his fucking kebab. Like, and those people are on YouTube forever. So the opportunity for them to change their mind is in a way gone in the world, like in terms of public perception. And it's like, I feel like those aren't conversations done in good faith. They're done to expose something.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, those aren't the conversations that we need to be having. Those kind of just look like you're going, haha, look at this guy who doesn't really know what he's talking about. And it's like, that's an opportunity missed. like if someone's so lazy in their thinking, this is just me as well. If someone's so lazy in their thinking and the methodology, then the way that they got to the misinformation-led nonsense is probably the same methodology you can use to get them to think more balanced on certain issues. But we need social media engagement first. That always comes first. We gotta get the clicks. You know, what's our clickbait title going to be? Which is why, like as I said, like social media isn't really a platform to have the discussions, because it only takes one person to instigate a back and forth, like personal attack or whatever. Like it's again, conservative friend back in. You know, I have a couple conservative friends, but we're still sticking with the same one. And yes, you're still a twat. We don't discuss politics often, but when we do, I actually quite enjoy it because, again, you mentioned earlier about how like adults talking to children and how like we get a bit frustrated when they don't know things. That's very prevalent in the world of professional sports as well. When ex-players, football players, become coaches, one of the biggest like criticisms that they get is that they don't coach properly. They just expect players to understand. I think Patrick Vieira and Thierry Henry, both from Arsenal players, their biggest critique early on was that it got. I think there's a rumor. I think it's true. Actually, Thierry Henry got so fed up that he just showed players video clips of himself. It's like, why can't you guys do this like me? And it's like, well, you need to tell us how. And that's a big thing with coaching and developing coaches and developing good players. It's easy to say what you want to see happen, but it's really difficult to explain how you want it to happen. For example, if I'm teaching you how to pass a football, Joe, I could say, kick it with the side of your foot. And you're like, okay, I'm doing it. And I will look at you and go, but you're not doing it well. How do I do it well? And you kind of get stuck on that, on the how bit, teaching the how. Like, how do we actually engage people to think? Because I'm not trying to make a right-wing person left-wing. I'm not seeing that. I'm trying to think, how do I stop a person from being hateful in their mindset? I don't care what you tick at the end of the day, honestly. I don't care what box you tick. I just don't want you to hate somebody because of the way they look, the way they are, who they identify as, what they identify as. I just don't want that. That's my main thing. So conservative friend aside, she doesn't hate people. Isn't hateful towards people. Actually disagrees with the conservatives' view on especially trans issues, because she has an affinity to that. There's an understanding there. But these things exist where she gets lumped in, oh, well, you're a transphobe because look who you voted for. As if, Labour hasn't had pretty bad takes on things like trans issues or bad takes on racial issues as well in the past. There's such a big nuance with these things. So when I'm talking to people, my goal isn't to get them to vote Labour like me, or vote Green Party like me, or vote this party like me. No, I just don't want you to be hateful in what you're saying. And I also want to understand the methodology on how you got there. Not why you got there, more how you got there. That's it, really. I think that's where the anxiety of political stress ends up kind of becoming more of a beautiful artistic thing in a way. Because if a conversation can flow really well and you're just going, hey, I really like this party's manifesto. I don't really agree with this part of the manifesto because of this. I actually like this bit because of this bit. Really? Okay, do you know more? Like, can you show me the evidence? Not because I'm saying you're lying. I just want to see it so I can compare and contrast to something else. Look at that. And we flow back and forth. That's a really cool conversation to have. Like, and there's no
Yeah.
conversation about like why and you have to do this. No, just enjoy the fact that like there's a slight disagreement, but that is the artistic beauty of it. That the disagreement is there, but it doesn't tear you apart. It kind of brings you together. You know?
Yeah, I think rational discourse is enjoyable. I just think that it's that people are. I love that you said good faith, because bad faith is a very, very important word that people should use and understand the actual meaning of, and realize when it's happening. There's a lot of bad faith arguments and engagement that people want to have about subjects where they're not interested in talking to you. They're just interested in parroting something, or they're just interested in saying something that they feel good about, right? And
Yeah.
that's not enjoyable, because there's no end goal. There's no way that you can come away from it thinking, oh yeah, I learned something, or that person really changed my opinion, or that person made me think about things differently. And
Yeah.
I actually like your metaphor for the coaching, for like the football coaching, actually, because in the case of like, of me doing a side pass, or like passing with the side of my foot, right? And it's like, yeah, if you help me, I can at least get an idea, but I'm not going to get it immediately anyway. But it's possible over time I will actually be able to do it properly. I will get what you were trying to say, or you will tell me the right thing, but it won't make sense in the moment. But then the more I do it, the more it will begin to make sense. And that's, again, in a similar vein, how these kind of discussions can happen. And so so the idea of, oh, I didn't initially, when I first heard them say that, that didn't make sense. Like that thing about, about sex and gender, that didn't make sense to me at all. Like that didn't make sense. But now I can see it in with all of the context of everything else. And then it's like, okay, now how do you feel about it? Right? Like now there's a difference that's occurring. So I really enjoy what can come out of it. And truly, I've had conversations with you and other people where I've had a fucking ball chatting about stuff. And the reason is because it does give you a sense of control, even if it's just simply we're talking about things. So therefore, we, how do I phrase this? We're talking about things, therefore, things are becoming unfogged. We're like removing the kind of the fog of doubt around topics, because we're talking about them. And again, when you remove the I think we talked about this before, but when you remove like the feeling of I don't want to talk about this with someone because I'm scared of the outcome, when you have a positive experience with someone with that, then you're like, oh, this was a positive outcome. I feel like I could talk to this person about this sort of thing in the future. And suddenly, like, you don't feel the anxiety of being of saying certain things around someone. And especially when these things are actually quite important, it's it's good that it's really good, I think, that you get the opportunity to go, I'm glad that we had this conversation. I'm glad that I got to talk about something that I fundamentally think is important, or that I think is an issue in society.
Yeah.
So
Like you mentioned fog, right? Like
yeah.
I think when you remove the fog of war, effectively, because
Mm.
of the battle that takes place in between that, where it's a lot of blurred lines and, as you said, like bad faith arguments, right? Once you remove that whole combative approach, you kind of just see things in a really a clearer way. You might not change your mind on things, but you might just see things differently. And as you said,
Yeah.
you might not be able to pass the ball perfectly first time round. But if I just have patience in that and you have patience in understanding it, then you're going to become a great passer of the ball eventually, you know?
Yeah.
It'll come. Like
On the
exposing yourself to new ideas is always a good thing.
Yeah, and that is specifically, even if I never change a person's opinion at any time in my life, I think that discussions where I don't seem like an enemy is a practice of empathy for them. It's a
Yeah.
practice in empathy. And in any way that you can cause people to practice empathy, I think you're doing a huge service to like your community, your local people, or just to someone randomly in the world somewhere. Like, I think you do have an effect. And I think it does change the in echo chambers. I think that's one of the things that breaks down, right? The idea that, like, you stop being empathetic for those outside because you just have these individuals who you can chat with who are all on your side and all othering the everything else and everyone else, right? So suddenly that empathy can be broken down somewhat. People learn empathy, but people also kind of have empathy at a certain kind of base foundation, to a certain extent. But you can absolutely go underneath the base foundation. There's nothing stating that that's the floor, and there's no way of going below that. So I do think that it's important to recognize and even if it doesn't all go according to your plan, even if you don't brainwash everyone around you to believe what you'd believe, which of course you shouldn't be your point anyway. But the idea of like, well, if I'm correct, then I would want everyone to think the same way as me. But ultimately, that's not the most fundamentally important thing, because some people might agree with you, some people might kind of get where you're going and end up in your direction. Some people might truly disagree with you. But the one thing you don't want is people going further away from your direction.
Yeah.
That's the absolute true bad result. Because even the person who hasn't changed their views, or even in many ways has become more staunch in their views, might still end up practicing empathy while doing so.
Yeah.
And so therefore there is a knock-on effect for them, you, and everyone else around both of you. So
I think there's a small chance I've already said this on the show before, maybe a journal. I'm going to end on this. Like maybe I can't remember when UKIP actually came into prominence for the first time. They've been about for a while. They ran in this election too. But like I'm just going to quickly check, but I have a really fun story with it, and pretty much it's literally just they're in Roman Road, which is in the east of London, and it's I'm going to say it was 2017. And it was like East London, very Asian-based community. They were in the market, had a stall, and it was like, what the hell are you guys doing here? And I can't remember, like I was like in my late teens or probably early teens actually, I don't know, mid-teens, whatever. And I had to speak to him because he was there. He was there. He was in Rome, and I had to speak to him. And I gingerly walked up, and it was at the time where I was finding confidence speaking to strangers. And as I was walking up, he said, "Hello, young man. Like let's have a chat. Let's have a chat." And I was like, "Sure, cool." And he was like, "Now I'm gonna guess that you're born here." I was like, "Yeah." And I was like, I'm going to say this now. I don't hate you. You are not my enemy. I was like, what a great start to a conversation. like, even if you are lying through your goddamn fucking teeth, okay? Which I actually don't think he was. What a great start to a conversation. Because immediately my hands to throw a left and right hook are down. And because I'm seeing that his hands are down. And he goes, our main thing is controlling immigration, limiting illegal immigration, and making sure that people who shouldn't be in our country aren't in our country. But we want to make sure that Britain is always coming first. And I was like, that actually doesn't sound half bad. Because when you say things like that, technically that's not wrong, That technically isn't wrong. But the conversation between that, I think my response to that was, well, you guys have mocked people who said really awful things, and you guys have a great reputation for obvious reasons. And what like is there? Do you disagree with the people who say horrible things? And I think he was like, Yeah, of course. If someone says anything racist, we deal with it as a party. They don't. The reality is they don't. They encourage racism. They breed racism. That's a sad reality of it. But you could see that there was a sliver of like decency within what he was trying to say. He was trying to be sincere. Again, there wasn't an attack. I shot back with a left with a jab effectively. Like, no, you guys have a pretty bad reputation for a reason. He was like, yeah. Like he says, one of the things that stuck with me, and I always laugh about it, is this. He goes, I can't be a racist, nor can I be against all immigration because my favorite food is Chinese. I get a weekly kebab. If we get rid of everyone from coming into this country, the things that we love about this country would disappear. And I was like, that's a beautiful thing to say, but you work and you are trying to win for UKIP. Like, so inherently, there's like you're so close. You know? You're so close, but so far at the same time. But that is an overall positive conversation. I didn't call him a racist. I said that the party he represents has problems with racism. I didn't call him a name. He didn't call me a name. We respect each other. Oh, and he said, "Would you consider coming down to one of our like rallies here and our events? We speak and we want to speak to members of different communities." And I said, "Honestly, it's not for me, but I appreciate this conversation." And I went on my merry way. And I was like, he's not bad. I would never vote for him, but he's not bad. The party sucks. The party sucks. But like that conversation, why people might look at UKIP and Reform as viable candidates. Yeah. And now I can understand how that system works and why people are ticking that box for reform. A lot of it comes from fear. And when we attack someone who's afraid, they're just going to become more afraid. And I'm like, in these conversations, I might take that UKIP stance, but that man's stance of like the UKIP man stance of being like, I'm not your enemy, but this is what I feel. Rather than just being like, you're a twat, you hate people, you're racist. Because that wouldn't have gone down well at all for either one of us. If he had gone, you don't belong here, you're dirty, you're like, you're an immigrant, you're like, I hate you and your people, that wouldn't have gone down well. If I had said, you're racist, you're a twat, that wouldn't have gone down well. Did I end up voting for UKIP? Absolutely. No. No, of course not. But did I end up having a feeling of a connection between another human being for a second? Yeah. And that helped solidify why I would never vote for UKIP. Even in the best of their representation, you still see what they truly stand for. Anything else?
No, it's just. I guess I was just going to say that, like, you know, if someone might have been if someone from UKIP might have been able to get Alex into their midst, I mean, surely some of you parties or groups could do better. Like, you know, like it just shows. I think the point is, it just shows how we are sort of. I was about to say we're sort of we're beginning to enter an age, but I don't think that's true. But I think what I'm trying to say is, I think we're cracking onto what actually will get people to. I think we're cracking into what it is that people that will make people go to one side or another. And ultimately sometimes it's not even about, like, you know, it sometimes it's as simple as just genuinely being nice to each other, which is a weird thing to say. But like that enough can change things. And we need to, and I think that, like, fundamentally, I don't think there was ever a point where that was the way we did things. I don't actually ever think that was true. I think that we've, you know, the power over the course of human history has said, no, do what I say, otherwise you're fucked, right? Like that's kind of how it's been done. But I think as in a world that we're living in now, and in a world where we're recognizing both, I mean, obviously this, you could almost take this to a manipulative standpoint. Obviously, I get that, but the point is that we're recognizing that the way to interact on these issues isn't to be as divisive as we have been, historically. There are reasons to, you know, make a big show, make a big rally. These are necessary and important things for, you know, because we can't just have nice, you know, discussions over tea. Like that's not all. Like we can't just. That's not how politics works,
No,
right?
sadly not.
However, the reality is that simply just, especially on an individual to individual basis, which is essentially what this was, because even though he's representing a party or whatever, like you're not talking to the party, you're not talking to a faceless thing, you're talking to this guy. And the reality is that all it can, like genuinely all it can take is just being like sincere with someone and having a good conversation. A lot of people are going to try and twist that, so don't get me wrong, like I'm not saying like don't still have elements of doubt around certain things, but people don't do that enough, because especially if especially when we're just talking about like friends, family, work colleagues, blah blah blah, like or even just like people in your local area that you have an affiliation with in some way. Just try to have, or even online, honestly, when essentially you're talking with someone who is just like you, a random schmo, you know, not like someone is kind of doing a lot of shit politically or whatever. Don't fall into the larger political game, right? Because it's not what we should be doing anyway. So let's not fall into that trap. Leave the political games for those like huge things that are going to try doing it, and learn how to see past the bullshit. But personally and interpersonally, for you and other people, just have a decent conversation and get rid of all that bullshit. Like, just kind of leave that out.
But yeah, I think with that being said, we're going to take 2 steps to the rear and get out of here. We're voting UKIP. See ya.
Reform got very high proportionality. See ya.
We don't discuss that, Joe. We just, you know, we don't discuss that, okay? We don't. But where's the stop button? There we go.